Hello, and welcome all of YouTube, or at least all of the YouTube that tunes into this. Um, Welcome to my reading, my story, my originally written, like this is mine, all mine. I came up with myself. My story called Suicide City. I had one before on one of my old channels called Suicide City, and I ended up rewriting it with kind of the same premise. It's different on my old channel, a lot different, but I took some inspiration from that and I kind of rewrote the story. So that's the story I'm going to be reading for you guys today, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So, Chapter 1, The Devastating Heat Wave, or Intro, A Terrible Turn of Events. We open on a hillside in Ponyville. The main six are having a nice little picnic. Twi, can you pass me the blanket before Rarity gets back with the flowers? She laughs a bit, and Twilight does as she's asked. Applejack laid it out, and they awaited the arrival of Rarity. Hey, Twilight, this is a pretty nice day, huh? States Applejack with a smile. Twilight nods in agreement, a rare smile on her face. Yeah, I agree. A nice and warm, happy day, happily bounces Pinkie Pie. It's getting a tad warm for me, quietly muttered Fluttershy. Oh, come on, you guys are babies. This ain't nothing. Okay, it's a little warm. Rainbow Dash looks at Twilight with increasing concern. Sweat began to bead on their brows, and it only continued to raise in temperature. So they did the one thing they think is necessary, and they ran to the castle. As they watched the unusually colorful town fade into a washed-out, dried-up, and desert-like hue. And as the heat wave continued its rise in temperature, buildings seemed like they were bending under the intense pressure of the heat. The townsfolk grew increasingly restless, their unusually cheerful demeanor now dampened by the ever-rising temperature. Spike, did we get a letter back from the princess yet? Twilight shouts with concern, making her voice strain. No, not yet, Twi, Spike said, sadness and worry growing more and more apparent on his face. With each passing hour, the heat would rise. Crops wilted in AJ's fields, and her granny, unable to stand the rise in temperature, died from heat stroke. In witnessing this saddening loss, Apple Bloom clung to Big Mac, who was also sobbing softly. After a good while, Big Mac carries out their grandmother and gave her a proper burial. Meanwhile, Rainbow Dash looks at Twilight. We have to think of something, and fast. It's like being trapped in a giant oven, Dash openly shouted. AJ spoke up in agreement. This just ain't natural. Could something be wrong with Equestria's magic? AJ looks at Twilight, who had a frantic and panicked look. Twi! But the best she got was Twilight had now ran to her desk to frantically search. For what? Not even she knew. The rest of them stood at the window of the castle and watched with hopelessness as the rest of Ponyville moved sluggishly, trying to continue on with their daily routines, despite the unearthly heat that seemed to be taking over the town. We gotta do something. We can't wait any longer, bluntly stated Rainbow Dash. And as if the weather was eavesdropping, the temperature began to lower, leaving behind a strange and troubling stillness. The six ponies looked at each other in great confusion and slight relief at the hope that they had just witnessed what was the worst. But moments ticked by, and it got chilly. Then it got cold. Then something tragic happened. Twilight, come quick! Shocked out of her trance-like state, she was called in only to find a dying Spike on the couch, with many blankets wrapped around him. As scales were freezing and falling off, his teeth were falling apart. His poor body couldn't handle such a drastic shift in temperature, so it began freezing itself over. It had been at least 4 to 6 hours since the beginning of this new frozen hellscape they found themselves in. Most of the townsfolk that still remained after the heat wave had gathered at the castle, hoping to find heat and comfort as their outside world seemed to get caught in a slow-moving layer of ice. The cold wave had arrived and had brought with it sharp bitterness that stung the senses and froze the breath in their lungs. Chapter 2: The Bitter Frost. The trees, once lush, now groan under the weight of the ice-covered leaves that now threatened to snap the branches that hold them. And streams that had already weakened to barely a trickle are now merely frozen puddles. The town of Ponyville was transformed into a crystalline prison, the beauty of the ice a stark contrast to the deep resonance of fear left behind the glossy fog of depression in their eyes. Ever-growing panic had set inside the hearts of the townsfolk. So unsure of what they should do, the six gathered at the castle's hearth to try and warm themselves, with the teeth chattering and bodies shivering uncontrollably. The pony's usually bouncy demeanor now squashed into nothing but sad and downtrodden. The one most affected by this rapid change was Rainbow Dash, her wings unable to withstand the rapid change in temperature. So they stood frozen in place. This cold was unlike anything they had ever experienced before, and it seemed to seep into every bone of their body. Twilight's horn glowed brightly as she levitated logs and kindling into place on the fire that was keeping them alive. The crackling of the fireplace was the only sound that pierced the eerie silence that had settled over the town. They huddled closely as the cold continued to set in. Twilight scratches her head. I've studied the weather patterns of Equestria for years now, Twilight says, her voice shaking. It's as if the seasons themselves are battling for total control, and we happen to be right in the middle of it. Just as Twilight finished speaking, a massive and final-sounding thud echoed through the castle. Twilight's heart skipped a beat when she rushed to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. A pony lay still on the ground outside, a sad, lifeless form in the stark whiteness. The friends looked at each other in horror. The normalcy of the temperature shifts was almost as terrifying as the extremes they had just endured. The heat wave had been brutal, but it brought them together in a fight against what they thought was a battle against nature's fury, only to discover the weather returning to normal, but with a new kind of dread, has now made itself known. A new looming sense of isolation and despair had made a new home in every pony's subconscious. Chapter 3: The Haunting Death. The sight of the fallen pony, a dense reminder of the gravity of the situation. They had all lost friends and family to the previous phases of this odd chain of events. The heat had taken the biggest toll on Fluttershy because not only did the unrelenting wave of suffocation claim poor Angel Bunny, but it unfortunately took many of her other animal companions, leaving them as parched, lifeless husks, empty and lost. The cold was the worst for both Rainbow Dash, because of her wings, but also Twilight, for her loss was her dear sun-like assistant, Spike. His dragon body was not one for defending strongly against this particularly devastating circumstance. And because of this, he too was now a thawed heap of dragon, sucked lifeless by the unearthly cold, then unthawed from the odd weather phenomenon, or left unthawed from the odd weather phenomenon. Now, as they rest in the new newest hellscape they have found themselves in, they get hit with looming paranoia. One by one, the townsfolk of Ponyville gather at the castle door, seeking the guidance from Twilight. Seeking guidance from Twilight. She was the only pony any pony else could think of that might have answers. They all sit gathered and sharing hushed whispers about the bodies that are starting to accumulate outside. Some of them talk about ponies leaping off the rooftops, theorizing that it's because they couldn't take the barrage of strange occurrences that seemed to be taking the town out of nowhere. The normally cheerful face of Pinkie Pie had sunk to her lowest low because of her loss of the cakes in the heat. So she too was hopeless and crushed. All was quiet up until Fluttershy spoke up and broke the silence. Her voice was trembling with a crippling sound of desperation. Wait, why am I standing? She attempts to move, but her own body was refusing to cooperate with her. Rainbow Dash watches her friend with rapidly growing concern. Are you okay, Flutters? Fluttershy's hauntingly still gaze remained fixed on an invisible horizon, a strange fog in her eyes. No, I don't think any of us are, she murmured, and shortly after bolts to the roof. Her friends calling to no avail, her wings flapping faster than ever. Now on the roof, she pauses just long enough for Rainbow Dash to get there and hear her say, I'm sorry. And with tears streaming down her face, and in the most horrifying display, she rips off her own wings. And as she screams with all the might in her lungs, she leaps from the roof to her spiked obliteration below. The town gasped in a collective of cries of despair as the yellow Pegasus hit the spikes and the reality of the third phase set in. The air grew thick with an unspoken understanding. This was no normal cycle of the seasons or a battle between the elements, but something far more sinister, something that threatened to tear them apart from within themselves. Fluttershy! Screamed Rainbow Dash. She cried and shouts fruitlessly, trying to save one of her own dearest friends, but the force holding every pony frozen in place, all of them forced to watch in a trance-like state the horrid actions that were unfolding in front of them. With the third phase in full swing, ponies dropping from all rooftops in sight. A lot had also taken the rope option, bodies hanging from lampposts, among the other ways that the omnipotent force had morbidly made them take their own lives. A pull of dread fell over Ponyville, the overwhelming choke of eerie silence, holding firm its grip on all of the ponies, and the cold giving way to the eerie silence that had for the moment consumed all of the attention of the town's ponies that had managed to gather there. They all clasp hooves and hold their loved ones tightly in fear of whether they would be the next. The warm embraces should have been reassuring, but was only a pain-wrenching reminder of all the horror they were now enduring. Fluttershy's gut-wrenching cries of pain and anguish could be heard for a solid few hours before she finally, after I think the fifth hour, uttered her last pain-soaked breath. Twilight shuddered, and shortly thereafter so did the rest of her friends, as they felt something in the very fabric of time rip. Chapter 3. Oh, wait. Never mind. The pony corpses that are littering the streets of Ponyville begin to twitch and writhe, as if jolted by an unseen current, with a sickening symphony of cracking bones putting themselves back into place. Flesh mends itself back together, and lifeless eyes blinked back open, functioning as if nothing had happened in the first place. Ponies were forced to stand frozen in place and watch in abject horror as friends, family, and pets alike slowly and painfully reassemble themselves piece by piece until their once mangled bodies stand once more. Not necessarily alive, but also not fully dead. Their movements were jerky and unnaturally stiff. The ponies that had once loved and held with an open hoof now having only macabre parodied looks on their faces, lost, lonely, and confused. Rainbows in pure shock and horror. Rainbow Dash only manages to whisper, "What's going on here?" To which the only response was chilling silence. That was immediately broken by the sounds of the shuffling and agony-drenched wailing that began to shuffle and jerk over towards the castle, where movements slowed with the return of the heat wave all over again. Sweat began beading on the pony's brows once more, as the temperature started spiking. The room became suffocating, a huge contrast to the cold dread felt only moments ago. Chapter 4: Back in Your Places. Twilight quickly put a barrier up to hold the reanimated corpses at bay. All of them could hear the frantic pleas from all the newly scared minds, all broken from experiencing their own demises. Then shortly after, rising back up, forcefully putting themselves back together as if nothing had happened, only to have everyone they once loved and held dear to be terrified to even get close to them. The cries outside grow in intenseness. "What can we do, Twy? I don't know how long I can listen to this," Applejack says, heavy-sounding words. Twilight, in a panic, could only stand and stare, with sad longing in her eyes, eager to help her friends, but unknowing of what she should do. With her dear Spike gone, but crying out to her, only tore at her mind's fragility even further. The heat only being at halfway to the max. "What are we going to do?" Twilight, getting stuck in a loop of unyielding guilt for being so ignorant to the situation. Rainbow stood, watching, clearly broken in her own way. She raised a hoof. And slap! Shocked and stunned, everyone stood silent as the sound echoed throughout the empty halls. And that is all I have right now for Suicide City. The MLP rewrite is what I'm going to call it right now. So, yeah, Suicide City. That is my story, and I will continue on it. It's going to take me some time, because not only am I working on that, but I'm also working on my AU, and I also do speed paints. I am also currently working on one of those as well. So things are just stacking up and lining up in place. And I hope that all of you guys will find and enjoy this content. So, have a lovely day. Bye.